Everyone on the carrier deck froze. The massive gray silhouette of the J-20C was gliding in low, too low, its nose pitched slightly downward, engines humming in a way that made even veteran pilots uneasy. Deck crews braced, officers shouted orders, and one flight instructor whispered, "He's coming in way too hot. Pull up. Pull up." But the J-20C didn't pull up. Instead, at just 200 feet above the carrier, the pilot snapped the jet sideways, rolled full span over the bow, and executed a maneuver no one had ever seen attempted that close to a carrier. For the next 3 seconds, the entire Navy thought the jet was crashing. The wind over the carrier deck was already rough, but nothing compared to the tension humming through every crew member watching the J-20C descend toward them. The jet wasn't just approaching, it was studying the deck, shifting angles like the pilot was testing boundaries, feeling out invisible lines no one else could see. "Why is he coming in from that vector?" Lieutenant Harris muttered, squinting through his visor. "Nobody approaches a carrier from the starboard sweep. Nobody." The J-20C dipped a little lower, its shadow slicing across the deck. A few crew members instinctively ducked as the roar washed over them. The pilot wasn't slowing. He wasn't aligning. He wasn't preparing for any standard pass. He looked committed to something else. Commander Reese stepped forward, binoculars pressed to his face. "He's holding altitude at 210 feet. Airspeed steady. Not adjusting for landing. He's setting up something unusual." "Unusual?" Harris shot back. "Sir, this looks reckless." But Reese didn't answer, because right then, the J-20C performed a micro-adjustment, a tiny left aileron twitch that only the most experienced aviators would recognize. It was the kind of movement pilots made right before a high-energy roll, or a last-second abort. "That's not but a correction," Reese whispered. "That's a cue." The jet slid closer, slicing through a column of sea spray. Even the ship's radar operators were confused. The jet's pattern didn't match any training pass, test run, or intercept demonstration. The J-20C drifted starboard, tilted slightly nose down, and for a split second, every person on deck believed the same thing. He's losing control. Voices erupted over the deck comms. "Brace! Brace! Brace!" Crews sprinted behind blast shields, helmets down, eyes locked on the descending fighter. But the J-20C didn't falter. It leaned, paused, then snapped into a bank so sharp the wingtips looked like they'd scraped the carrier's deck. The jet rolled fully sideways at a distance no pilot would dare attempt. Gasps echoed across the deck. "What the hell maneuver is that?" Harris shouted. Nobody answered. Because no one, on that carrier or in their training books, had ever seen a J-20C attempt this close proximity roll over a moving carrier in open sea. And it had only just begun. The J-20C completed the impossible sideways roll just feet above the carrier's bow, but instead of climbing out like any sane pilot would, it dropped even lower. So low the heat from its exhaust rippled across the deck like a wave striking metal. "Impossible. He's riding ground effect on a carrier," Reese muttered, lowering his binoculars as if they were malfunctioning. But they weren't. The pilot was doing something no manual, no regulation, and no simulation had ever dared to model, using the narrow cushion of compressed air between the jet and the deck to glide along the surface at 500 knots. The deck crew stood frozen, eyes tracking the jet that seemed to skim the carrier like a stone skipping across water. Sparks flickered under the belly as the J-20C's vectoring fins sliced the air just inches above steel. "He's going to clip the deck. He's going to hit it!" a young mechanic shouted, ducking as the noise thundered across them. But the jet didn't hit. In a sudden burst of precision, the J-20C pitched its nose up sharply, but instead of climbing away, it pivoted its entire body around its left wing in what looked like a vertical drift, something that simply shouldn't be aerodynamically possible at that speed. a maneuver the Americans called a dead man turn, a maneuver nobody executed at sea level, let alone next to a floating runway. Even the ship's captain emerged onto the deck, disbelief etched across his face. "Who is flying that jet?" he demanded, but nobody had an answer. The pilot inside was a ghost. No comms, no transponder ID, no signal beyond the thunderous roar of the WS-15 engines tearing through salt air. Then, the J-20C leveled out and accelerated straight toward the aft section of the carrier. "Dear God, he's lining up for a tail strike?" Harris said. Reese shook his head. "No. Look at his angle. He's planning something even dumber." The jet dipped low again, gear retracted, wings flexing. And then, before anyone could react, the J-20C pulled upward into a razor-thin, knife-edge climb along the right side of the carrier's island tower, so close the crew could see the pilot's helmet flash by. The stunt was insane. But the move coming next would silence the entire fleet. For a full second, nobody breathed. The J-20C's knife-edge climb past the carrier's island was so tight, crew members swore the jet's wingtip brushed the tower. The ship vibrated from the pressure wave, rattling tools, helmets, even bolts along the catapult track. It was the kind of maneuver pilots attempted once in a lifetime, in a simulator, not next to a billion-dollar warship. But the pilot wasn't done. At the top of the climb, the J-20C snapped into a sudden inverted position, flying upside down barely 70 feet above the deck. Its canopy glimmered in the sun as the jet streaked forward. Through the transparent glass, a few stunned Ned deck officers actually saw the pilot's hand. Steady, calm, unmoving, rested on the throttle as if he were taking an evening stroll. "This is unreal," Harris whispered. "He's inverted over a carrier, with no landing configuration, no clearance, no comms." Reese didn't reply. He couldn't. His jaw hung open like every other person witnessing the impossible. Then the ship's radar officer's voice crackled through the comms. "Sir, the J-20C just cut throttle. He's dropping speed." "What?" Reese barked. But it was true. The jet, still inverted, dipped its nose, matching the carrier's forward motion. It drifted downward until it was barely 40 feet above the deck, flying upside down at a speed that could rip the aircraft apart if the pilot made even a hair's-width mistake. "He's shadowing the carrier," Harris said in disbelief. "Who does that? What is he proving?" Before anyone could answer, the J-20C performed something that made 3 crewmen dive to the ground. It flipped. Not a gentle roll, not a controlled inversion. A whip-fast, violent front flip that sent the jet tumbling nose over tail in midair, right above the landing strip. Gasps, screams. Someone shouted, "He's crashing!" But the J-20C snapped out of the rotation like it had invisible rails guiding it. Its nose leveled, engines roared, and the fighter blasted forward, leaving a turbulent wake of steam and shockwaves deafening the entire deck. Reese clutched the railing. "That's not a stunt," he said quietly. "That's a message." And the move that followed would prove exactly who the pilot was, and why he wasn't afraid of the entire carrier group watching him. The J-20C rocketed out of its front flip recovery like a missile, skimming just above the ocean before climbing back toward the carrier with a predatory precision. Every radar, every camera, every pair of binoculars on the ship tracked it like prey. But the jet moved with the confidence of something that owned the sky. "He's setting up for another pass," Harris said, but there was a tremor in his voice this time. The kind a pilot gets when watching something outside the boundaries of training and physics. Reese kept his eyes locked on the aircraft. "Look at the angle. That's not a pass. That's formation." Harris blinked. "Formation with what? There's nothing else up there." "No," Reese said, his tone flattening. "He's forming with us." It sounded insane, but the proof came seconds later. The J-20C slid into perfect alignment with the moving carrier, matching its speed, its bearing, even the small yawing motions caused by the waves beneath. The jet tightened its position, slotting itself exactly where an escort helicopter might hover. 20 feet above the deck. 10 feet, lateral distance. No margin for error. Deck crew members backed away slowly, terrified that a single gust of wind could turn the fighter into a fireball. "Sir, this pilot is insane," Harris said, shaking his head. "No rookie flies like this. No veteran tries to." "It's not a rookie," Reese whispered. The J-20C's canopy glinted again as the fighter drifted even closer, close enough that the carrier crew could clearly see the helmet shape inside. Something about it, its color, its markings, the small diagonal stripe across the side, made Reese's stomach drop. "No way," he muttered. Before Harris could ask what he meant, the carrier suddenly rocked from a wave, shifting half a degree to port, and the J-20C shifted with it. Not late, not after correcting, instantly. Like the pilot knew exactly how the ship would move before it happened. Only one pilot in the region was rumored to have that kind of predictive instinct, something between genius and madness. Harris exhaled. "Sir, who the hell is flying that thing?" Reese swallowed hard. "I think I already know." The carrier crew watched in stunned silence as the J-20C held its impossible formation, moving in perfect harmony with a 100,000-ton warship as If the two machines shared a single mind, every tiny shift of the deck, every sway of the bow, every vibration. The jet mirrored all of it with zero delay. Reese felt his heartbeat climbing into his throat. "Only one pilot flies like this," he murmured. Harris glanced at him. "Who?" Reese didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer to the edge of the deck as if proximity would help him believe what he was seeing. Rumors had circulated for years about a Chinese test pilot who flew without conventional instinct, someone who could read airflow the way others read books. A pilot who refused simulators because real sky is the only teacher. Some called him reckless. Others called him a savant. But everyone agreed on one thing. He didn't follow rules. He rewrote them. And if Reese was right, that man was now hovering 10 feet from his carrier. The jet suddenly drifted backward, sliding behind the carrier like a shadow slipping into place. Its nose dipped as if acknowledging the ship, an intentional gesture, not an accident. "What's he doing now?" Harris asked, gripping the railing. Reese's eyes widened. "He's positioning for a reverse pass." "A what?" But before Reese could explain, the J-20C executed a maneuver so bold the entire deck erupted in chaos. The jet climbed sharply, stalled deliberately, then pivoted downward, flying backward for a split second using nothing but thrust vectoring and precise elevator control. It was an aerial trick meant only for dry land air shows, not the middle of the sea. "Brace for impact!" someone shouted as alarms blared. The J-20C wasn't falling. It was placing itself into a tight, backward drift, descending directly toward the deck like a leaf in slow motion. Gasps spread across the carrier. "He's landing?" Harris said, astonished. "No," Reese breathed. "Watch." The J-20C hovered, suspended between flight and free fall, then suddenly rolled sideways, its wingtips clearing deck antennas by mere inches, and slid into a perfect line with the carrier's main runway, exactly as if the pilot had been planning this from the beginning. And the next move would answer the question everyone feared to ask. Was he demonstrating skill or issuing a warning? Every alarm on the carrier blared at once. Red lights flashed along the island tower as the J-20C drifted into the landing lane like a ghost aircraft. No comms, no clearance, no identification, no intention to follow any naval protocol. Just raw, unrestrained mastery. Deck crews scrambled behind blast shields. Officers ran to stations. Weapons teams on the escort destroyer received orders to stand by, but hold fire unless absolutely necessary. Because one thing was clear now, this pilot wasn't attacking. He was performing, and he wanted everyone to watch. The J-20C held its line, nose perfectly level with the deck, gear still retracted. Its slow, deliberate descent felt like a challenge, one that echoed through every rank on board. Harris wiped sweat off his forehead. "Sir, no one short of a maniac attempts a gear-up carrier skim. If he touches the deck, he won't," Reese said quietly. Because he knew exactly who would fly this way. Only one pilot was rumored to have the audacity to use a carrier deck like a canvas, drawing maneuvers no other fighter in the world could trace. A man known by a single call sign whispered through aviation circles, Shadow Crane. A pilot whose exact identity was classified. A pilot who trained alone at high-altitude test bases. A pilot infamous for performing moves so violent most aircraft would tear themselves apart attempting them. And now, he was dancing over their ship. The J-20C suddenly dipped lower, so low the deck officers could see the shimmering heat haze rolling off its belly. A single spark, just one, flew as the jet's ventral fin brushed the air above the metal. "This is it! He's going to strike!" someone yelled. But the jet didn't strike. Instead, in a move that defied every handbook ever written, the J-20C snapped into a vertical flare, pitching its nose straight upward while its body hovered barely 8 feet above the flight deck. The carrier's bow shockwaves swirled around it, tossing spray and steam in every direction. The pilot held it, balanced between lift and gravity, like he was controlling physics itself. Then, with a deafening roar, the J-20C blasted upward in a perfectly vertical climb, spiraling around its own engine plume as it shot into the sky. Harris stared, slack-jawed. "Sir, nobody else alive can fly like that." Reese exhaled slowly. "I know." Because the final stunt, the one Shadow Crane always saved for last, hadn't happened yet. And when it did, the entire Pacific Fleet would remember it forever. The J-20C shot skyward like a spear, climbing far above the carrier until it was just a silhouette framed against the sun. The deck crew shielded their eyes, waiting, because anyone who knew the legend of Shadow Crane knew his flights always ended with one final maneuver. A maneuver so dangerous, so technically insane, that most pilots dismissed it as rumor. Harris swallowed. "Sir, is he actually going to do it?" Reese didn't answer. He couldn't. His pulse hammered in his ears as the distant black shape vanished briefly into a bright column of sunlight. Then, the sky peeled open. The J-20C dropped from the sun in a near-vertical dive, rolling violently, left, right, left, like a blade cutting through air. Shockwaves spiraled behind it. The jet raced toward the carrier at a velocity no human should control. "He's coming in too fast!" someone yelled. "Impact course!" another voice screamed. But Reese stepped forward, because he knew. "Hold your positions," he commanded. "This is the signature." At the last possible second, the exact millisecond before collision, the J-20C FLL attend out, slicing parallel to the deck so close that its intake shock cones blasted hats and clipboards into the air. Crew members ducked as the jet skimmed the deck, then cut engines entirely, gliding on pure momentum as it passed the control tower. Silence. Just the hiss of wind. Then, with a sudden burst that felt like thunder splitting the ocean, the J-20C reignited its engines in mid-glide and snapped upward into a vertical corkscrew, spiraling into the sky like a dragon slingshotting itself into the heavens. The jet vanished into the clouds. Gone. No message, no comms, no explanation, just a demonstration. Harris stood trembling. Shadow Crane really was here. Reese finally allowed himself to breathe, his voice barely above a whisper. If he wanted us to know he could touch this deck, he just told us. The carrier's alarms powered down. Officers stood in awe. No one spoke for several seconds. Because everyone understood the same thing. This wasn't an accident. It was a warning, and a statement of dominance. A message not just to this carrier, but to every fleet watching the Pacific. If you want to see what happened the next time Shadow Crane returned, and why the carrier group changed its entire protocol because of this stunt, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, should this pilot be feared or respected?